Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're set for, frankly, in terms of podcasts, my favorite time of year. Mark and I are setting out to do our the first year we've done 16 preview podcasts for the SEC, one for each team. And congratulations to those fans whose teams are at the back of the alphabet. The last 2 years, we've gone alphabetically from the front. This year, we're going alphabetically starting at the back. So Vanderbilt, you're going to have a good long time to listen to this and let it marinate leading up to the season, as opposed to, squeezing it in the week of opening day or what have you. So, Mark, a little bit of a longer intro on this one than most of the others because this is the first in the series. How does it feel now that we're here? Preview content is on the site, and you and I are doing this again for the third consecutive January.
I know it's kind of surreal in a way. We wait all fall because we go to fall games, we talk to people, we kind of gather information with this in mind. Okay, so we need to be prepared once that long build up to the season is not such a long build up anymore. And I do think that with what we've been able to do with the SEC Extra site, just kind of giving you a little bit more in the league where it just means more. I think that's the part that that is really exciting about this time of year because at this point everyone has hope. All your goals are still intact, and that's an incredible thing to keep in mind because hope is such a powerful motivator for all of us. And you look at a club like Vanderbilt making some changes in the off season from the coaching staff, using the transfer portal in a different way than they have in the program's past. But there's a lot of similarities too. A lot of returnees from last year, and then there's Tim Corbin sitting in the dugout, who's been as successful as any coach that we have in the sport. And all of that, and you put it all together, and let's try to make sense of it. Over the next 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. I think this is among the most fascinating programs in the SEC right now. For a long time, it was among the most fascinating because it was just among the most successful and the most talented. And, watching a Vanderbilt game was like watching a who's who of future MLB All-Stars for a long time. And obviously they're still doing a good job putting players into pro baseball. That really has not changed, but they're fascinating also because there is a pretty prominent discussion being had in college baseball at large about Vanderbilt's place in 2025, both within the SEC and also nationally. But what's so fascinating about it to me is, I'm sure you heard this a lot, is leading into a world where NIL is a thing, where free transferring is a thing, all of that. I heard a lot about, Vanderbilt's going to have to adjust. I wonder what's going to happen with Vanderbilt. And I felt like there was a lot of predictions of Vanderbilt's impending demise.
There
right?
was some glee in those statements.
100%. 100%. And while those predictions of just a total fall off a cliff have not come to fruition, it was just a couple of years ago that Vanderbilt hosted, right? There has been a noticeable drop off since the 2021 runner-up finish. So, two parts, I guess, for you to kick things off here. One is what do you make of this larger discussion around Vanderbilt baseball, which is like a parlor game for a lot of people around college baseball? And then also, what do you think the offseason for Vanderbilt, where they did, use the portal more than they ever have? They did shake up the coaching staff. What do you think that says about where they feel like they are inside the program?
Well, the first part of the question is, the big picture for Vandy. Where are they? And I do think that when you think about NIL, when you think about the portal, Vanderbilt, in theory would have some disadvantages, but some of the context I've received, through the fall is Vandy's a player in the NIL game. Nashville is a city with a lot of money, and there's, Vanderbilt has a lot of affluent graduates, and they're able to, we'll just say, keep pace when they choose to. And as a result of that, anyone who's expecting Vandy to take to not be able to keep up in the NIL game is going to be disappointed, but based on the feedback I'm getting. Now, the other part of this is expectations are so high because of all the success that anything that doesn't result in a trip to Omaha and hey, you hosted all the way there, that's a disappointment. So last year was a disappointment, and there's no two ways around that. I do think that as a result, some changes were made, coaching staff, maybe some new ideas, new energy, kind of shake things up a little bit. And there are times, especially with a long-time successful staff, that things can get a little stale. And maybe this is a way to preempt that before it gets to the point of no return. So that's going to be exciting to me to see. Okay, you have two new assistants trying to mesh with one of the most successful coaches in the game, and he's obviously going to do things his way, but maybe some different ideas in his ear. And we're going to see, because that's a learning curve in itself. I mean, it's one thing to do it in practice, but it's another thing when the bullets are flying during the season. How does this all shake out? So that's one of the fascinating storylines that we'll be covering, and others on our staff will be following through the season. And I do think that as a result, Vandy is, for me, is you look on paper and they've got enough players to compete. I mean, they could be back in Omaha again. But there's also enough questions, and we'll get into this in a minute, that maybe they don't. And some of the teams that in the preseason we're going to project behind them are able to surpass them. And because the schedule is really challenging. And, if you stumble and things kind of get sideways, it's going to be really hard to make up ground because of how challenging that the opposition is.
Yeah, it's such a good point you make about just, Tim Corbin's been at this a long time. He did not forget how to coach baseball. He did not
Right.
forget how to recruit. He did not forget how to, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's key to keep things fresh, and it is the challenge. And we've seen this throughout the history of college baseball with coaches that have, set a high standard and then have to like fight and scratch and
Mm-hmm.
claw to keep it. That you have to keep what is still working and innovate and change up what's not working anymore. And sometimes it can be hard, I would imagine, to
Yeah.
pick out which is which, right? In some cases. But I think I said this all off season. I think it speaks. I think it's a good thing for Vanderbilt and the health of this team and the program moving forward that there was an acknowledgement of the status quo is not good enough right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made that change, and we'll see if it works. What looks like it is going to continue to be the case with Vanderbilt, and this is if you're optimistic about the Commodores, this is probably where you look, is that the talent is on the mound is pretty standard Vanderbilt stuff, right?
And that's that's a good thing. That's a
Right.
compliment.
JD Thompson stepped into the rotation last year as
Mm-hmm.
a sophomore and really kind of quietly had an excellent season in that
Mm-hmm.
role. He's probably the default Friday guy. Whether he throws Fridays or not, we'll see. But in terms of being experienced, having the stuff, yada, 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 they bring in Cody Bowker from Georgetown, who's, it's not elite stuff, but it's good stuff, good strike thrower, won a lot of games at Georgetown, knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You got Ethan McIlvain, who's electric. Injuries
Yeah.
kind of kept him from being what we thought he might be last year as a freshman, but now that he's healthy, what do they get from him? And then, last year we looked at their bullpen and thought, man, that's a lot of freshmen. But for the
Yeah.
most part, that group, Cyber and Kranzler and Miller Green, that whole
Mm-hmm.
group really acquitted itself pretty nicely. And now, so you're looking at that group coming back as sophomores now,
Yeah.
and thinking that, hey, that's actually probably a strength now, is that kind of bullpen. And they get a healthy Sawyer Hawks back, who we thought pretty highly of going into last year, and he just never quite got right. And so
Mm-hmm.
now back and healthy and hopefully doing big things for them, I think that makes them even stronger. So on the mound, this looks like a pretty standard issue, and I mean that in a good way. Standard issue Vanderbilt pitching staff in terms of just, they've got dudes, they've got good role players on the mound,
Right.
they've got different looks, they've got experience. It really checks a lot of boxes in that regard.
Yeah. I think the question for me is, who elevates into that Friday night ace role? I mean, because Thompson was more of a, Saturday, Sunday kind of guy last year. Is he ready to elevate? Because, I mean, our fans know that the Friday night aces in this league are the best pitchers in the country. So you've really got to be on your game, or you have one bad inning, and that's a loss. So that'll be interesting to me because there's also McIlvain who, from a stuff standpoint, he could. I mean, he checks a lot of boxes, but can he turn that projection into production? And that's the piece that I'm eager to find out what he can do. One, he's got to stay healthy like everyone else, but two, um, can he reach that enormous potential that everyone sees in him? And then a guy like Bowker who's coming in who may not be what you're the prototype from a stuff standpoint, but understands how to pitch, and certainly, as we've seen, you don't have to throw 95 with a 3,000 spin rate to get people out if you understand how to pitch. All right, and I do think that there's a place for that, and sometimes we're all guilty of it. We get enamored with the guy who's just you know who's the pro scout's dream.
Blowing the doors off of people.
Yeah, and forget about the guy who just kind of gets it, right? And you still have to have a minimum level, and certainly Bowker's got that, but of stuff. But I do think that that's the piece I want to see is how does that shake out, and where do the freshmen come in? I mean, they've got a couple guys, Hudson Barton, Matthew Shorey, who could be difference makers on the mound. As and Vandy traditionally has been the kind of program that takes those guys slowly, and then towards the end of the year, they're in the mix. So how quickly can they get into it, or do they? Right? Because it's really tough. I mean, you're going to hear this over and over again. There were only 2 freshmen in the SEC who started, more than half their uh, weekend starts last year. So you had Liam Peterson at Florida and Zane Adams in Alabama, and no one else as a freshman threw more than half their team's weekend starts. So it's tough, and that's the point. So you're hoping for experience. You're hoping that some of these older guys are ready to take the next jump. Oh, and before we move on pitchers, I mean Miller Green, he could be one of the best. I was really impressed seeing him last year. I think he's one of the just he's an uncomfortable at bat, and I think he could be one of the if it all clicks as he continues his involvement as a pitcher, could be one of the top relievers in the country.
Yeah, spent some time pitching for Team USA over the summer. Certainly a good indicator of how the college baseball world more broadly thinks of, and the scouting community for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
thinks of him. So I'm with you on that. And of course, the bigger question here is just going to be offense as the
Mm-hmm.
as the big picture, and more specifically, I mean, look, I'm sure those in the program are sick of hearing about it, but until either the lineup shows the physicality to match most of the rest of the SEC, or B, the program overcomes that shortcoming.
With
Like,
something else,
right,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
we're gonna continue to talk about it. I mean, it's a team that last year hit 72 home runs, next to last in the SEC, ahead of only Mizzou, which we described as just a totally punchless offense largely last year. Certainly
Mm-hmm.
from an extra base hit standpoint. Um, but they were closer to Mizzou in home run total than they were to, say, Kentucky, which, was more physical last year, but was not a team that we thought of as like, this is a team that's waiting around for a 3-run homer,
Right.
But they were closer to the bottom than they were to kind of that, let's call it a midpoint of a team like Kentucky. And they have guys who have physicality, right? We talked about Braden Holcomb at this time last year. Obviously, it was a little bit of a mixed bag. Colin Barzie's in that mix.
Yeah.
Johnston, the freshman phenom that I'm assuming we'll talk a little more about here in a minute. But so they've got guys with strength. It's not like it's not there, but I just don't think you can overestimate how important being able to run the ball out of the ballpark is in 2025 college baseball, especially in the SEC, when 6 teams hit more than 100 home runs last year in the league. 3 out of the 4 Omaha teams,
Right.
includes 3 of the 4 teams that got to Omaha last year from the league. The fourth, of course, was Kentucky, as I just mentioned, hit 89. Like, you just have to have that in your bag these days.
Yeah.
We don't really have a lot of evidence on the other side of that you can overcome that offensively and do other things so well that it leads to you being an Omaha level team. Kentucky's as close as we have. And I think there's two things there. One is that Kentucky was more physical last year than people gave them credit for. And then secondly, that they hit a unicorn of a roster construction to get where they got. So I guess the path is there. If Vanderbilt's awesome on the mound and if they move the ball offensively really, really well and what have you, I'm not saying it's impossible, but man, in this version of college baseball, it is really, really hard when that's the home run is not something in your bag up and down your lineup.
You need the big inning. You really do. I mean, you scratch and claw and do everything you can, and you got one run out of it. And then you do that 3 times in the game, and you're feeling pretty good. And then one swing of the bat later, it's tied.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with this kind of deal. If you're really exclusively without the home run, and Vandy, I think they'll hit a little more this year, from a power standpoint, just based on
I agree for the record.
the lineup composition. I do think it's an improvement, but it's a matter of degrees, isn't it? And I do think that's where a guy like Brody Johnston, I mean, we talked about how hard it is for freshmen to come in and make an impact on the mound. Well, it's still really hard to come in as a position player. I mean, Gavin Grahovic had a great year for A&M last year. Really physical freshman. If you saw him, you would look at him and think, he's a major league guy just based on his body composition, and that's what you're going to need, I think, to be successful right away. Or Brody Johnston's that kind of guy. I mean, Florida's got a guy, Brendan Lawson, who's kind of that similar mold, and I think that's if you're looking for breakout players in year one as a freshman, you want the big physical 6'1". He's already 210. That kind of physical presence that the ball just jumps, and then you got to hope that they make the transition to SEC pitching. And from everything we've seen from Johnston, I mean, he's got a chance to do that. And if he does, then that's a game changer, because you've got a guy, and it's a lot to put on a freshman, but you've got a guy that pitching coaches have to worry about. And then all these other guys around him are either getting better pitches to hit, or they're hitting them in on base because he's walking because they're not pitching to him, or he just doubled off the wall. And everything kind of gets easier for those around you, and you aren't having to work for, that, walk, sacrifice, single and hope he can score because it was deep enough kind of offense, right? So I think that to me is one of the keys for Vandy as we look ahead to this year. And I guess the other part of that is some of the players who do have experience, who can, someone's going to make a jump. They always do. And a guy like RJ Austin, he's really talented. He's had a really productive career at times, and you can see it's there. Is this the year he elevates, right? Jonathan Bastine, veteran shortstop, leader in the middle of the infield. Pretty good production. Hit 299 last year. Double-digit home runs. Is that this year? Is it 330 with 18 home runs? Right, because that would be a big difference for this lineup. I think those are the kinds of, a guy like Braden Holcomb, you mentioned Colin Barzey, really physical, athletic players. It's there. You talk about projection. Their guys, scouts are going to say, hey, this is what we're looking for. It's just can you produce, and can you do things that are going to keep you in the lineup every day? And because if they do, then Vandy can stack up. I really think that's the key for them, is some of these players who you would consider the 4 through 7 type of players in the lineup depth. What did they give you? Are they ready to step up and be legitimate guys that the pitching coach is worried about, or are they just okay guys who you can pitch to? And if you make a mistake, they beat you, but otherwise, you can kind of pitch to them. And I think that to me will be how far Vandy goes is based on that answer.
Yeah, it's a couple things there. One is it's such a good point about Jonathan Vastine, and I look at him too. Even if he is kind of just the same player coming back, I mean, how many Division One teams would? Okay, there's a few, like Alabama would probably rather just have Justin LeBron, but
Yeah.
how many Division One teams would love to have a Jonathan Vastine
Oh
in
yeah.
the lineup? Like 960 career defender, has basically played every day at short the last 2 years. He's gotten better offensively every single
Hmm.
year. Like he's a leader on the field. Like you just know exactly what you're going to get. And in a position like that, that's really it's really important that you kind
Yeah.
of know what you're going to get
Great point.
on a
Great
day to
point.
day basis. And so that's a big thing. And Birdie Johnston is so interesting to me because, and shout out to our friend Arya Gerson from the Tennessean,
Hmm.
who brought this up to me, so that it doesn't seem like it was something that came from Joe's dome. But she asked me if I'd ever heard of a player who had his trajectory, which is that he was a nice prospect at a high school, but he wasn't. This wasn't a guy who it's like, oh man, what a coup for Vanderbilt to get him to
Hmm.
campus. It wasn't until he went to the Appy League and hit 284 or something like that there, and put up 100 plus mile an hour exit velocities with a wood bat, and won All-Star Game MVP, and did all that we kind of took notice. And then he got there to Vanderbilt in the fall and just kept hitting. And so now we're in a situation where there's a kind of a consensus in college baseball that, hey, this is one of the best
Yeah.
handful of freshmen to watch going into the season. And so that glow up, as the kids would say, is kind of, to me, seems unprecedented. I'm sure there are other examples, but
Hmm.
man, that's a trajectory that we've not seen a lot of.
Well, I mean, typically it's that kind of guy, but he doesn't go to Vandy. He
Right.
goes, to a lower level, and he just explodes, and then he's the world's his oyster. He can go wherever he wants, the next year, and then they often do. But yeah, it is kind of interesting to. It's a great job by that staff to evaluate him properly, because if if you if you see something that others don't, and you act on it, and you're wrong, then everybody questions you, right? Because hey, why are you going against the norm? Why are you bucking the trend? So it is refreshing to see someone. Hey, we really like this kid. We think he's under evaluated. Um, we're bringing him in, and then wow, when you get rewarded for that, it's like a double win, man. I mean, it's you get to thumb your nose at the naysayers, as the kids will say, right?
Yeah, yeah, certainly that's when you feel good about as a coach. My last thing on
Hmm.
Vanderbilt is that I think an overlooked thing that I think is going to have a big a lot of bearing on how good they are this year is Colin Barsey ready to be an everyday catcher?
Hmm.
That's obviously new for him. The physical,
Defensively, yeah.
yeah, defensively, the physical tools offensively are pretty apparent.
Hmm.
I think there's pretty good chance he hits well, but can he be an everyday catcher? Because there is something, especially when you're a team where the margins might be thin, like Vanderbilt, where
Yeah.
if your offense isn't averaging 9 runs a game, balls to the backstop can just be demoralizing. Or guys, teams running all over you. And now some of
Yeah.
that's on the pitchers and holding guys, yada yada. But having that kind of stuff happen can kind of be demoralizing when, to your point, you're working so hard to score runs, you're having to manufacture things in it, but if you're giving things away on the other end, it's just so
Hmm.
frustrating. So
Yeah.
I think that's an underrated. I don't think it's the most important thing. I don't think it's the most pivotal thing, but I do think it is in the mix of some of the most important
Yeah.
things Vanderbilt's going to have to go their way.
Yeah. It's another question that's unanswered about this program, and we've gone through a litany of them here. So I do think that because of that, it's going to be a fascinating club to follow as we go through that, as we start to get answers to these questions, because we're going to talk about other programs, you know, between now and the opening day, where there aren't that many questions. I mean, you really are there, and then there's some that they're pretty much all questions and there aren't any answers. Well, Vanderbilt has some answers, right? So it's this is somewhere in between, but I do think that that's what makes this part of the year so fun, because we follow this close as anybody, and we don't know what's going on. I mean, you really there's really going to be so much that changes, even between what we've heard in the fall and what we've heard heading into the practice, and then once the games start, all of that changes again. And I think that's what's going to make, with this league with 16 teams, 13 of them made the postseason last year. And, heading into the year, I think everybody except maybe Missouri thinks they're going to the regionals this year, and Missouri might think they are. So there's all of these expectations to manage, and somebody's gonna lose and somebody's gonna win every single time out, and that's with Vandy. I mean, we've got them. They're ranked 15 or so in our
16,
preseason,
yep.
16 in a preseason poll. I mean, we believe so. So we feel like these questions are going to be answered in the affirmative, and we'll find out if we're right here, in a couple months.
It is one of the most fun things, and also one of the most humbling things about doing what we do for a living is that, I don't know, about 5 games into the season, there's always a situation where it's like, this thing that I thought all off season was obviously wrong.
Yeah.
This whole off season, I thought this thing, and I could not have been more wrong. But that's, again, that's fun, humbling, but fun. That's, if as much as it would boost Mark and I's egos to be right all the time, it'd be kind of boring, to be honest, to know what was going to happen before it happened. So it keeps us on our toes, and that is a beautiful thing.
Fair enough.
That's a good place to leave it. That's a preview episode 1 in the can. That's a little bit of a landmark there as we roll on with our preseason preview content. Obviously, we'll have 15 more of these between now and opening day, and a ton of written content stuff as we record this Monday, January 13th. Preview content is on the website. We'll have at least one thing every day, and most days multiple things, sometimes 3 things a day on the day. So plenty of stuff out there, no matter who your SEC team is. So check all of that out at d1baseball.com. That is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.